Hello everyone, testing, testing. Hello. Good afternoon everyone. It's a pleasure to open and welcome the panelists and remote participants are connecting online and to the audience today. So we will move forward with the next session. This is session 5 of today's Saturday. Saturday is a very important day at COP because we are talking about regenerative systems and we are focusing very much on health and nutrition. So this session will be particularly looking at innovation to satisfy the core human needs of 10 billion people by 2050. It's the case of health and nutrition. What I was mentioning in previous session is the importance of this session because, as you know, the Global Innovation Hub is focusing on an approach that looks into the core human needs and how core human needs of countries, subnational governments, cities, individuals can be satisfied throughout innovation. And we are promoting a moonshot thinking, a transformative innovation approach that will help societies to satisfy the core human needs of 10 billion flourishing lives. And of course, the nutrition and health is one of the key core human needs. So, as part of this session today, we have the privilege to welcome some of the high-level working group members of the working group on nutrition and health. We are very privileged to have, I would say, they are thought leaders, leader voices in this theme, particularly in the area of nutrition. We have managed to establish a working group with very well-known participants, members that are engaged with the Global Innovation Hub to, through this working group, to design and identify what are the priorities for our work program that will help us to move us forward from COP27 towards COP28 and beyond. So they are helping us to identify priority areas. Today we learned that much can be done by promoting discussions, technologies, and a package of different innovation approaches for beans production. But of course, in terms of nutrition, the scope is much broader. And so we count on their support, we count on the vision, we count on their suggestions on what could be very impactful moving forward, and we then implement such an ambitious work plan. So what we have today is a representative of these high-level working groups. I'd like to start introducing Stephanie von Stein. She is a member of the Good Food Institute. The Good Food Institute has been supporting us with the establishment of the working group that I mentioned before, and she's a Senior Associate Director on International Engagement, so it's a pleasure to have you on this panel, Stephanie. And the next in the list is we have Paul Newnham. He's been today opening the day with a fantastic session that was launching an initiative that is named Beans is How. And so I recommend you to look at that session, but we were very privileged to host the launching of the initiative and to also to the partners to learn what is the potential and how impactful can be the adoption of beans production and connect all of these potentials to the climate agenda through the Paris agreements and the NDCs. The climate action plans of the countries should contain very impactful actions that can help them to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. So this is a very powerful message to countries to say this is an important solution that can be helpful to satisfy not only the climate goals but also the nutrition demands. And we also have, connecting remotely, I'd like to welcome Professor Marc. He is a professor of the Sustainable Industrial Tissue Engineering of Maastricht University. We are very privileged to have Marc. He's been instrumental on the first round of meetings of the high-level working group, also sharing his experience and support in where do we need to prioritize and focus the work of the working group. So much welcome all of you, and the next steps is I'd like to invite to share with us some suggestions and recommendations that will be followed by this guiding question for you. And I'd like to ask the panelists, in this exercise that we have conducting the first exchanges and dialogues within the working groups, we were establishing under the framework of satisfying the core human needs as a target element in terms of planning the way forward, an agenda that is an agenda of development. What is the opportunity to look into health and nutrition as one of the priority areas, and how to connect that to the climate agenda? What could be the benefits of moving to a path of development in terms of nutrition and health and connect that to the climate agenda? So I would like to start with one of the panelists who would like to take on this question. Paul.
Well, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here again, and thank you for hosting this important conversation. I think, we don't have enough time. Time is running out. We need action. We've had a lot of challenges that have hit our world and in the last couple of years that have made it hard for us to see progress. And so I think one of the first things I would say is we can't afford to look at things in isolation. We have to look at interventions and action that delivers results in multiple areas. So this is why I think coming together around looking at planet and also people, which is climate and health, is so critical. Because otherwise we could be causing ourselves issues, which we then have have further work to undo. So I think the first point I wanted to make is it's important for us to connect the dots. And so this is a really, I want to just commend the conversation here that the UNFCCC is doing. I also think innovation is critical because we need to think about how do we solve the problems that we face. And I think just in looking at this, there's a couple of different tracks. It's often we look for one silver bullet or one solution, but it needs to be a basket of solutions. We need diversity that we lean into so that we think about diverse solutions for different parts of the world, and we need different innovations for different parts of the world. So I think things like when we think about protein, we think about alternate proteins often. There's a lot of conversation about technology. This is very important for some parts of the world and for some challenges we face. We also need to look at existing solutions. Beans is one example that can provide protein, other foods, whole foods that can give you the nutrients you need to also address that. So it's not an either or, it's an and. So I think for me, this idea of really thinking in integrated ways in a systems approach is really critical, and I just think that's important for us to acknowledge right at the beginning and in any innovation that we're driving forward.
Thank you so much. Stephanie, would you like to comment?
Sure. Hear me? Yes. Good.
If we can.
So climate change is already causing food insecurity, and we all know that. I don't need to repeat the statistics. I just want to say that we know that's happening, and then we have wars like the war in Ukraine, which has caused a massive addition to the food shortage. We have 46 million metric ton shortage due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so wars and climate change are going to be with us, unfortunately, for some time. We haven't moved fast enough to change, especially in the agriculture sector. I represent GFI, the Good Food Institute, and the Good Food Institute is interested in coming up with solutions for protein diversification away from industrial animal agriculture, wherever that exists, and I believe that's 98% of animal agriculture. We're not interested in disrupting pastoral grazing of animals, but we do think that this industrial animal agriculture needs to change. And we have a solution. Plant-based protein contributes 98% less greenhouse gas emissions than concentrated animal feeding operations do. Cultivated meat can contribute up to 92% fewer greenhouse gases than concentrated animal feeding operations do. So that is what we're advocating at GFI, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'd like to pass the floor to Marc.
If you can hear me.
Yes,
I also didn't realize
you.
I was so big at the screen, so I apologize for that. But thanks for having me. By the way, I broke my leg, so I couldn't come to Egypt. That I have to stay at home. No, I echo what Paul and Stephanie already said. But it so happens that a lot of the innovations that could drive away from sort of climate unfriendly food systems, and Stephanie alluded to industrial livestock agriculture, all of those innovations driving away from, you still hear me? No.
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay. All those innovations driving away from that food system also happen to drive towards a more healthy diet. So it's very well known that a plant-based diet in the long run, and even a vegan diet even more so, is better for your health than a animal protein-based diet. It's not really well recognized by the public because we grew up with the myth that animal proteins are good for us and that they make us wholesome and human. But at the same time, we already know that there is a lot of disease associated with animal protein. So the innovations driving away from climate unfriendly food systems actually drive towards healthier food systems, and of course also towards more secure food systems, which by all means is the biggest health impact that you can have.
Thank you, Marc. So I would like to pack these interventions into different baskets, but this COP is the COP of implementation, as we clearly hear. This is a COP that is focusing very much on agriculture, and also we can see the presence of the nutrition and food systems industry becoming more and more active in this community. So you tackle a very important point, that is the role of the innovation in advancing the food systems agenda and climate change. And the solutions apparently are all there. We also hear that finance is available. It's a matter of targeting the right avenues to access in a more expedite to finance and to unlock the existing innovations. But what happens with the demands? What happens with countries, subnational governments and cities understanding exactly what is needed before jumping into bringing solutions on board? In your view, is this conversation happening? Are the key actors in the negotiations looking at what is needed in terms of nutrition and health? For example, do they know what is needed in terms of proteins, in terms of nutrients that will satisfy the demand of the population?
Look, I mean, there was a UN Food Systems Summit the last year. There was a lot of consultation that went on at different parts of the world that then came together with a number of countries setting up implementation plans. So there's been a lot of dialogue on this. I think when you think about food though, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of people talking past one another that are also trying to put forward one particular agenda. And the challenge is we need to see, and this is why I come back to the idea of a basket of solutions or a diversity of approaches. Because sometimes when you say, you know, and this is a conversation, if animal-based proteins are not good, in some parts of the world, they're actually very important for nutritional and micro and macronutrients. And yes, ideally, there might be some way to do that through plant-based options, but they're not available, or it's not practical because they're a herder community in a very rural part of the world. And so what I think we need is we need to be very aware of the diversity of approaches. And I think this can confuse people. Obviously then industry gets involved. Obviously then national agendas get involved. Obviously then culture gets involved. And so you end up with all of these layers, making it very complicated to actually understand what should and shouldn't we be doing, what is the right solution. And partly, in what I hear, it's often about trying to find a solution rather than finding a number of solutions or a direction of travel. So if you think about the Eat Lancet that came out, there was a lot of controversy around it saying you shouldn't eat so much meat. Well, if you actually look at the Eat Lancet, it actually said that you need to reduce the amount, but in some parts of the world it said you need to increase. So there was already too much. And so this is where it's about shifts, it's about balance, and it's about having that diverse and integrated conversation. And so I think for me, that's really important for us to acknowledge that there are different situations with different solutions. And actually we need to have more data, we need to do more research that can help to talk about where are the most appropriate solutions, what are the shifts that need to happen there, and how do we work with government, work with industry to drive them forward.
I'm not a nutritionist, but GFI is doing a lot of work on that front because we get a lot of questions about the health of plant-based products, plant-based meats. And we are very excited that the research is starting to bear out that plant-based meats are better for people on a number of measures than animal-based meats. They're lower in cholesterol, saturated fat. They have often have fiber, and they're lower in calories. People say they may be higher in sodium. They are higher in sodium than animal meat, but that's animal meat that hasn't been seasoned. I don't know if any of you eats beef that has no salt or chicken that has no salt on it. So when you actually compare apples to apples, even on the sodium measure, they're very similar. So we're seeing a lot of good studies, especially one out of Stanford University that compared people eating meat and people eating plant-based meat over 8 weeks, and their heart health improved over that time, and they lost weight over that time. So, and GFI has a wealth of data on our website if you want to take a look later, but yep.
Thank you so much. Actually, before passing to Marc, one interesting aspect of understanding what is needed before jumping into the solutions is because by doing that, you can also look the needs not only in terms of the nutritional aspects for this particular team, but also in terms of how this connects to the climate agenda. And then by understanding that, build by backcasting alternative solutions that are disrupting the current supply chain. That is what it's all about, is to identify the solutions in a way that are fully aligned with the Paris Agreement, with the 1.5, but also with the SDGs. So it's not only about nutrition or nutritional aspects of the food that is required, but also that production is aligned with the Paris Agreement. So then you have the opportunity to expand the scope for innovative solutions and bring the enablers that will help them after the countries under the current circumstances or specific conditions to implement those identified solutions. Would you like to jump in on this, Marc?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I echo what Paul said. You need a diversity of approaches, and one is not going to be sufficient. What I feel is very, very important and is happening in some parts of the world where the information directly to the public has been very, very powerful. In some, granted, Western European countries, there's a lot of media attention to the climate impact of livestock agriculture, for instance, and that is a discussion that has started. based on this very, very public information, not driven by governments, but essentially driven by media, by actors out there who have been very vocal about this. And in some areas in this part of the world, in Western Europe, you cannot open a newspaper or look at a TV program without a reference of livestock agriculture to climate change. So I think that's a very, very powerful thing. And that needs to kind of be added to kind of government-directed or educational-directed approaches to also move consumers to think about these issues.
Thank you so much, Marc. Allow me to introduce and welcome Patrick Brown. Patrick Brown has been also a founder member of the high-level working group and helping us to establish the working group of the Global Innovation Hub. So, Patrick, welcome to this dialogue, and I don't know if you managed to come when this discussion around the need to initiate a dialogue with key actors that participate in the climate agenda to establish what is needed in terms of core human needs, and one of these core needs being nutrition and health. And whether we have clarity on what is needed by from countries, parties, moving forward to their long-term strategies, for example.
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry I'm late. I got lost. But, and I missed the, but I think, and you were covering the nutrition part, and I think that, as you said, it's I would say it's very well established that no animal products are required for an optimally healthy diet. This is multiple scientific papers on this. And also from a nutritional standpoint, I would say some of the best nutritionists in the world have looked at the plant-based versus animal products. And I would say there's a strong consensus among the people who are scientifically legit that plant-based meats from nutrition and health standpoint are as good or better than the animal products. But it sounds like we're also getting to a couple of other points that I think are really interesting. I guess one of them is access. I think a critical question is who benefits, and I think it would be useful. I don't know whether the gain is really, really high on this, but useful to start with looking at. Maybe you're a pro. Oh, is that better? No. Anyway, it would be useful to start with who benefits from the animal-based food system. And actually, if you look data from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, which I've recently analyzed, and what fraction of all the meat consumed in the world is consumed in high and upper middle income countries? Does anyone want to hazard a guess? 98%. So 2% of the meat in the world is consumed in lower middle or low income countries. And it's exactly the same for dairy products. 98% of the milk and milk products in the world are consumed in the high and upper middle income countries. A lot of people raise the question about what about all the poor people in the world who depend on meat? There are some poor people who depend on animal products, and that's worth acknowledging, but very, very few. The overwhelming majority of animal products go to the wealthy. If you're thinking about food equity, the way that we produce food from animals today uses, by the estimate of the International Livestock Research Institute, which is, I think, a pretty well-known group and scientifically serious, 45% of the ice-free surface of Earth is used to raise animals for food. this year's soybean crop is grown on less than 1% of Earth's land area, and it contains more protein than, not only more protein than all the meat consumed globally, it contains more protein than is required to meet the protein needs of every human being living on Earth. Okay? That tells you something about the relative requirements to meet human protein needs using plant-derived proteins versus animal proteins. And the fact that plant-derived proteins are so much less resource-intensive means that they could be much more affordable to, and in fact this is why only rich people eat meat pretty much, to the poorer people in the world. And one last thing I want to say before I shut up, and I'm sorry the sound is so terrible, but I've also done an analysis about what would happen to farmer livelihoods if the demand for animal products went away. And it turns out that, and I can go through the data if people want, but that the land that's currently being used to raise animals for food, you can calculate using satellite imaging, and there's been several scientific papers about this, what its carbon capture potential is. And you can calculate actually on the resolution of 10 square meters, okay? Very high resolution. And if you do that, what's evident is at a carbon price in the low tens of dollars, essentially 100% of all the animal farmers in the world would be making several times more money than they're making today if they were reforesting and restoring the ecosystems and selling the carbon offsets. Of course, right now the market's too dysfunctional for that, but that's a huge win-win for the farmers and climate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to welcome Marc Buckley. Marc Buckley has been also very instrumental in the establishing of the working group. Thank you, Marc. The next round of the questions will be focusing more on the work of the working group ahead. You were much welcome to be part of this group because of your impactful activities, your vision, the way you are promoting the disrupting of the supply chain in terms of nutrition and health is well connected in most of the cases with the land management practices and of course with regeneration of ecosystems that is aligned with the Paris Agreement. In your activities, what the global innovation can offer to amplify and move your initiatives forward, and what will be your recommendation to the Global Innovation Hub that should be a focus of the work plan moving forward for next year?
Thank you for having me here. Great question. So basically, innovation around ag and food has been stuck in the dark ages. We've been talking about cellular agriculture for 113 years was the first known time. And today, we're still struggling with scale, policy, and the infrastructure to put that into practice. So we have great innovations that are already out there for the future of food, for the future of food production, but the policy, the infrastructure to get it out to those who desperately need it is not there. And I said this in the last panel before, but an agrarian society is the world's oldest known economy. It's 16,000 years old, and we are the least digitized, the least innovative, the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. We haven't updated our infrastructure and policies, and we're kind of reactionary. We're waiting for that moment in time to react instead of being proactive and creating the policies and the infrastructure. So this working group, I really feel is vital for us to create that roadmap, to set the policy, to make sure that we think about the value chains, that we're ready to go in the future, and that we pave the way for those needed innovations and the update of the food systems to really move forward. So.
Maybe the same question to the other panelists. What can the global innovation do to assist you in addressing the barriers to scale up your activities? And what, in your view, should be the focus of this working group supporting the Global Innovation Hub moving forward?
So I think I would say action. Like, pick 3 or 4 things that we can actually get going and give us support, network amplification to try and help connect dots so that we can move them forward. I think we just need to, there's a lot of conversation going on. You know, Marc just said we've been talking 100 and something years about cellular. If cellular is the answer, then, or one of the answers, then we should be working that through. We need to pick 3 or 4 horses and I think then start to back them. And so I think part of the challenge is we get stuck in talking about everything and then we talk about nothing. We kind of know some of the shifts that need to happen. They're not necessarily universal for every part of the world, so we need to stop trying to get everyone to agree. But we can go, you know what? Yeah, we need to see some shifts around the kind of protein, the way we produce food and how that's done. Here's one way to do that. Here we need to think about opening up, you know, some more diversity into diets. How do we do that? Here's some technology maybe around how do we build that. We need to pick a couple of areas and then move forward. I think that's what I would say.
Let me follow up quickly on that. Today you launched the Beans is How. So what are the barriers to implementation, or what are the areas that should help that initiative to expand and to scale up quickly? And why beans?
Yeah, so Beans is How was launched this morning. It's a 5-year program to try and accelerate the doubling of consumption of beans, peas, lentils and pulses, to say how can we take a food that already exists, that is pretty universal around the world, that most countries in the world have some form of beans, and take it to scale. So to think about how we could increase consumption. We're not talking about what you shouldn't eat. We're not saying that beans are better than everything else, but we are saying that beans are pretty much universally agreed to be better for your nutrition, better for the climate, and also they're cost effective, and that means they're accessible and affordable. So I think what's the barrier? The barrier is that at the moment beans are consumed in many parts of the world. We're still looking at the statistics on this, but what I understand is in the past 30 years we haven't seen a major increase in bean consumption, peas, pulses, lentils. What we've seen is a leveling, even though we're seeing a need to shift. So we need to do something. In some parts of the world, big markets, we're seeing a decline going on at the moment. Europe, North America, they're going up slightly. India, Mexico, they're actually leveling or going down slightly. There's a transition going because beans are seen as cheap or poor food, or they're not valued. And this is a question also about affordability sometimes. Affordability, you can make something affordable and then people don't value it. So we need to talk about the value, we need to sell the value, we need to make it attractive. And so this is a marketing, communication, accessibility, affordability. There's lots of technologies, but beans are something that already exists. They can come online straight away. There's not we need to scale up the production, of course. We need to work with farmers, researchers, all of this, get the barriers, but we can get that going.
Thank you so much, Paul. So the Good Food Institute,
Okay.
how can we, what
Yeah.
is what we can do to scale up, to help you scale up to your activities?
Thank you. And I love beans personally, but I think that it's really hard to ask people to change diets. And in addition, when they are aspirational eaters, they're looking to eat more meat, especially in rising income countries like China and India. We're seeing meat consumption really go through the roof. And we can ask people to change what they eat all we want, but it hasn't worked. We've been trying that for 50 years. I love the idea, and I think that it has potential, particularly where we're eating too much meat already in the global north. However, we advocate for innovation that gives people what they want, that tastes like meat, that has a sensory profile of meat, and our goal is taste the same or better, cost the same or less, and is widely available. And so for that to happen, we need to scale up the infrastructure. And one of my projects, I think for 2023, I hope, is to work with the development banks on some projects in the global south to co-fund infrastructure projects for fermentation technology, and even cultivated meat, but particularly fermentation technology, which at scale can produce protein at a lot lower cost than even the industrial animal agriculture does today. So my goal is to work with the development finance institutions together with the private sector to go in together to build some infrastructure in places like India and Southeast Asia. So that's one of the things on my agenda for 2023.
Thank you, Stephanie. And in one line, what in your view is the priority that the working group should be looking at?
I love the idea of innovation and getting finance. You can't do anything without money. So get the global development banks on board with the innovation that needs to happen. And they work hand in hand with governments. So together with governments, we can scale up where this needs to happen.
Thank you so much. Let me move to Marc Post first, remotely. Marc, Professor Post, in your view, to facilitate and amplify the work you're doing in your sector, including, for example, the engagement with the new generations that will take the new policies and the new instruments to accelerate what is needed in terms of nutrition. What do you think is what the global innovation can do to support the academia and the research institutions and focusing on areas that are much impactful?
Yeah, I think a lot of it already has been said, but I again want to emphasize, and I realize what Stephanie is saying, that it has been proven very, very hard to change the behavior of consumers, but it has been possible. We have a nice example in, actually in the global north, where, for instance, caged eggs, solely on the basis of animal welfare issues, eventually got banned from the market because they could be replaced by a consumer good that was essentially the same, roughly a little bit more expensive, but it was a consumer-driven eventual policy adoption to ban caged eggs from the market. So it can happen, but it requires a lot of information. It requires a very concerted effort and focus on the items that really are important for people, whether it be animal welfare, climate change, food security, really focus on those items. Of course, for the innovations, you need eventually an infrastructure. It would also help, and we have kind of frantically stayed away from that, but it will also help if we stop subsidizing and really putting cost to real meat, the real cost to the real meat. Currently, we are not doing that, and you could perhaps use some of that money to, from a government perspective, start to drive or help the innovations. There's a lot of capital needed for global fermentation, for global cultivated meat. There's even more capital needed for beans, not so much capital. So again, very diverse solutions, but in the end, it only makes sense if you produce alternatives, climate-friendly alternatives, when people start to adopt it massively.
Thank you, Professor Post. Patrick, Impossible Foods. So what is what the Innovation Hub can offer to amplify this innovation, these trends, these ideas that your organization is promoting?
Well, I don't think of this as a vehicle for helping Impossible Foods, just to be clear. I think that what we could do is start with the fact that the most informed people in government, in the policy world, in the finance and so forth, don't have a clue about the importance of replacing animals in the food system in solving climate change, in addressing water shortage, in addressing the biodiversity collapse, and so forth. All the things where it's the single biggest problem virtually nobody knows about. And among those that do, they don't know how far we are towards a solution that doesn't require people to make, you know, in general, when people think about, well, if we're going to change people's diets, this is going to require us either telling them what to eat, telling farmers what they can grow, or trying to brainwash the population to change their diets or something like that. Where the reality is, and I think most of the people here are sort of aware, is that people aren't going to change their diets. People who love meat are going to keep eating meat. 99% of the hardcore dedicated climate scientists here probably are having meat for dinner. You can't convince people to give up the foods they love. And if you told farmers what to grow or people what they could buy, you'd be thrown out of office the next day. But the reality is, that's not the solution, but there is a solution, and the solution is, we now know how to make meat products from plant ingredients that are nutritionally superior by very objective standards, that at scale are way cheaper, vastly better for the environment, like 5% the land, 1/10 of the water, way less agrochemicals, vastly reduced greenhouse gas footprint. Most importantly, that to hardcore meat consumers are rated just as good. So there are many meat products now made from plants that, well, they're not widely distributed, but that are now starting to come on the market, that in blind consumer tests are rated as good or better than the animal products by meat-eating consumers. My point here is not to pitch Impossible Foods to you, it's to make the point that policymakers want advice on what to do, and they want clear information on and objective information that's scientifically vetted about what's possible, what's required to enable this, what are the potential unintended consequences, what are the beneficial consequences, and so forth. And so the situation is, we have basically proven technology that can replace animals in the food system with a fraction of the impact, better nutrition and affordability. Nobody knows about it, and the technology is only getting better. I think if we could just communicate the message, there is a solution in hand. It's not telling people what to eat, purely market-based, and get that to people who are in a position to act on it. I think that would be extremely valuable. And we could even make, specific recommendations about how do you facilitate, not command it, how do you facilitate this transition and all of its benefits. And I think that's what we should be focusing on.
Thank you so much. So, quickly, consumer behavior, you have the information, you say that it's more beneficial to go that path. How can we then address this barrier and make to effective means to raise awareness, for example? What could be a strategy to change consumer behavior towards this path?
I don't think of it as a consumer behavior issue at all, okay? We're not going to try to brainwash consumers to change their behavior. The best way to change people's buying behavior and eating behavior is to give them something that they value more than what they have right now. And my point about it is, this is now doable. We have proven technology, it's even in its infancy, only going to get better, that produces meat that consumers rate as good, better on flavor alone, and it's better nutritionally and so forth. Nobody knows about this. I think if we could propose an action plan, it's not telling consumers what to do. It's not educating consumers about what they should eat. That just doesn't work. I mean, everybody here knows what they should eat, and they're probably eating stuff that they know they shouldn't eat, okay? It just doesn't, education, I love education, I'm an educator, I've been a professor my whole adult life. It doesn't address this kind of problem. So, technology, it's a technology problem, scale the technology, remove the barriers to scaling, remove the barriers to market entry. We need to create an actionable plan to offer to, decision makers.
Do you want to intervene? Yes.
Look, I think this is a really interesting conversation, but I also think we're saying we can't change consumer behavior, and then we're saying we want to change consumer behavior. So I think I completely understand that. I do think consumers are more informed in many markets. They're making more choices. The majority of choices are made around cost, convenience, and taste. And so what we need to do is make it more convenient, affordable, and taste. And so these are the things that people make. Also culturally appropriate in terms of what they're used to eating. And so I think this is one of the big keys. And I think it's a basket of solutions. And so I think, we need to see that. The challenge on often plant alternatives has been that they're not as healthy. So it's great that you've got those options, because often you get, this is better for the environment and worse for you. There is garbage, yes. So I think those we need to push to the side. Then there's an affordability question often, and that's a big challenge that you hear from people in big meat eating communities. But I do think we do have the ability to actually not change behavior, but encourage behaviors that already exist in many communities where foods are being eaten that are actually part of the future, not something they need to move away. And so in the beans campaign, that's part of what we're trying to do. There's huge swathes of the world that eat beans. They're shifting to meat. So that's actually a behavior change that's happening. We need to counter that by talking about the solutions that exist that can come online today, tomorrow, affordably, accessibly around the world, that have improved varieties. And that's what we're trying to do there. It's not to say don't keep investing in plant-based alternatives. It's saying it's an and, because otherwise we've got probably 4 or 5 years till even if the whole world united around this to get that to scale. Because what's the market size at the moment? It's small. So this is where I kind of think we've got to have a much more integrated approach, and we've got to encourage some of the foods that are good alternatives that do provide all-round health, The ambassador from Nigeria was here. He's 82. He said he grew up on beans, and he said it's partly 3 times a day. Now we want the next generation in Nigeria to do the same. We don't want to just transition them to alternates. You know, we want to encourage that. So this is where I think it's got to be a plus. Different markets, different solutions, not trying to push one solution, because otherwise we just get into a big argument.
Very, very interesting discussion. And I think it's part of a complex system as well. I mean, consumer behavior is, of course, very important, but the institutional arrangements around what countries are promoting, aligned with the Paris Agreement, is very important. Policy development, targeting or using the investment infrastructure, investing in the right development so that we have a positive development agenda, right, aligned with the Paris Agreement. So we also need to work with the financiers to ensure that the finance are flowing in the right direction and not in the wrong direction as well. I mean, prevent them to continue promoting the flows of finance in the wrong direction. Marc, you wanted to add?
I mean, I absolutely love what Paul said. So I have children, and I always tell them I'm making my fartless chili tonight, and they laugh, but we eat beans quite a bit, and I think that's a great transition. We're all on the same page. In reality, we need a diverse food system. I don't want to be told what to eat, but what I can tell you is processed foods in our current system of the food industry is not getting more healthy and nutritious. It's actually moving in the other direction, as well as more impact on environmental impacts and health impacts for humanity. It's more fast food, it's unhealthier food. The knowledge around food and how to cook and how to understand what we're putting in our mouth has disappeared over the years, and I think part of what our high-level working group is to bring back a little bit of that old slow food process and the depth and substance of how do we make our meals more healthy and nutritious, at the same time reduce the cost of goods sold so that it is available for everyone, so that we change the market, so that healthy and nutritious food can compete with unhealthy fast food or the quick fix. I think that's a big key and a challenge that we have to meet in the group as well.
Thank you so much. We are coming to a close of this wonderful panel. You can see that the importance of stimulating the discussion, but also the opportunity to bring these brilliant experts, thought leaders, to help us reshape the agenda of the working group and prioritize a number of actions that will take us together to COP28 and beyond. So stay tuned. The working groups will have a meeting today, 2 hours meeting, to continue debating on this and to explore options where we can synergize with the Global Innovation Hub. A big thanks to all the panelists, to all the working group members. Thank you for your efforts and thank you for your guidance. We look forward to continue collaborating. Thank you. Give them a round of applause. Thank you to all. Thank you to Marc.